Today, the United States commands a staggering global presence. It sustains an economy measured in the tens of trillions, possesses a massive military force, and spans a geographic footprint that bridges two oceans. But long before modern borders were drawn, this landmass was home to a diverse array of native communities. Following the Ice Age, these early hunter-gatherers migrated and evolved over thousands of years into complex cultures connected by vast trading networks stretching across the continent. In the Southwest, societies like the Pueblos constructed intricate, multi-story stone villages directly into cliff faces. These were permanent urban centers, sustained by organized agriculture, not scattered temporary camps. When European explorers began charting these coastlines in the late 15th century, they brought foreign diseases. Lacking immunity to these new illnesses, an estimated 90. By the early 1600s, European powers arrived to exploit the remaining land. The English established a tenuous foothold in Jamestown, Virginia, eventually building 13 distinct colonies along the eastern seaboard, driven by lucrative exports like tobacco and beaver pelts. Compared to the vast territories claimed by France to the west, these English settlements were just a thin sliver of coastal land. So how did a fragmented, heavily taxed collection of outposts manage to break free from the British Empire and absorb an entire continent? Following the 7 Years' War, the British Crown amassed massive debts and tried to recoup the money by levying heavy taxes on the 13 colonies. The colonists protested the financial strain of taxation without representation, and boycotts quickly escalated into armed rebellion at Lexington and Concord. The rebels made their ideological break official. In 1776, Thomas Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence, formalizing the colony's intent to govern themselves as a sovereign nation rather than remain subjects of a distant monarch. Led by General George Washington and heavily supported by the French military, the Continental Army forced the British to surrender. By 1783, the United States was recognized as an independent country, and its borders immediately expanded westward to the Mississippi River. The map grew even faster a few decades later. In 1803, President Jefferson bought the Louisiana Territory from France for $15 million. At a bargain price, this single purchase doubled the size of the United States overnight. Driven by manifest destiny, the belief that the nation was meant to span the entire continent, the U.S. kept pushing. Following the annexation of Texas and a swift victory in the Mexican-American War, the borders surged outward, reaching the Pacific Ocean. This aggressive territorial expansion generated immense wealth, particularly after the discovery of gold in California. But incorporating all this new land forced a dangerous political question that would tear the young republic apart. Expanding the map required devastating human costs. During the 1830s, the government enforced the removal of many Native American tribes from southern states. Forced to march to reservations in brutal conditions, thousands died from disease and starvation along what became known as the Trail of Tears. A sharp economic fracture also divided the new nation. The northern states industrialized rapidly, while the southern states built an agrarian economy that relied almost entirely on enslaved labor. As the borders moved west, fierce disagreements erupted over whether the new territories would allow slavery. When Abraham Lincoln won the presidency, southern states feared slavery would be outlawed. They seceded from the Union, triggering the American Civil War. This conflict utilized vast railway networks, telegrams, armored ironclads, and repeater rifles. The war ground on for 4 years, resulting in a staggering loss of life on both sides. After brutal campaigns, the Union outlasted the Confederacy. General Robert E. Lee surrendered in 1865. The nation's borders were preserved, and the 13th Amendment officially abolished slavery throughout the country. The physical map of the continent remained intact, and a moral evil was written out of the law. But the sheer destruction and the deep ideological wounds of the conflict would take generations to heal. By the turn of the 20th century, the U.S. looked beyond its coastlines. Following victory in the 1898 Spanish-American War, the nation claimed territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, projecting military and economic influence into the Caribbean and the Pacific. Back home, the economy accelerated. Emerging from the First World War, the 1920s brought massive technological leaps. Radios filled living rooms, and mass production at factories pumped out millions of cars, driving a vast economic expansion. But that growth collapsed. The Wall Street crash of 1929 wiped out the stock market, throwing millions into severe poverty and the massive unemployment lines of the Great Depression. The nation might have remained focused inward if not for a surprise attack in 1941. The bombing of the naval base at Pearl Harbor forced the U.S. out of its isolationist stance, dragging it directly into a two-front global conflict. Fighting across the Pacific, North Africa, and Europe, the U.S. eventually utilized devastating new atomic weapons to force a Japanese surrender. America emerged from World War II with its industrial capacity intact and a nuclear monopoly, securing its position as the dominant global power. The post-war era brought a new kind of conflict. With Europe divided, the U.S. and the Soviet Union bypassed fighting over physical territory and instead engaged in a decades-long struggle for ideological dominance through espionage and proxy wars. This intense rivalry acted as an accelerator for technological advancement. Competing for ultimate supremacy, the two nations fueled the space race, a sprint that peaked when NASA successfully landed the first humans on the moon. Yet, as America projected its influence to the stars, it wrestled with profound inequalities at home. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, the civil rights movement brought citizens into the streets, protesting segregation and demanding equality and voting rights for African Americans. For centuries, the vast oceans surrounding the continent provided a natural layer of security. But on September 11, 2001, the merciless attacks on the World Trade Center proved that geography could no longer shield the country. The military adapted to an entirely new style of warfare. They shifted their focus to fighting borderless, non-state threats, where enemies were no longer defined by the neat lines on a map. The nation's status as a superpower is the cumulative result of its physical expansion, the steady evolution of its core ideals, and its resilience through 3 centuries of change.